Okay, so here we're in Parshat Vayeira, right? We're in Parshat Vayeira, and since last week, 1 week, the whole world turned upside down, and we can have a whole different share on that. Not now. Maybe I'll stick it in. I mean, you can't avoid the whole world turning upside down, but we know that it's all anyway written in the Torah. It's written in the Parshat Hashavua. We don't have any more Nevi'im that are openly prophesying, but we always have Parshat Hashavua, and the Parshat Hashavua is helping us to interpret current events. So we have all of these different ways of living our week. Rabbi Nachman says like this. He says, first of all, so there's 3 messages we're getting at all times. Message number 1 is from the weekly Torah portion. We have a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov that if you learn the Torah portion properly, then you can hear, first of all, personal messages or a heads up on what the week will be like. Okay, I see already women nodding their heads, right? That means I read the Parsha, yes, that's what's happening. Also, there's a concept in the Parsha of that which is spiritually on sale. What do I mean by that? Every Parshat Hashavua has specific kochos, strengths that we can integrate and internalize. Every Parsha has its specific strength. Usually that specific strength is the title of the Parsha, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So we have to know that Hashem is speaking to us through the Parsha. Hashem is speaking to us through current events. Nowadays, no one can afford to be an ostrich and just put their head in the sand and not pay attention to what's going on in the world. Years and years ago, we could have, but now we can't. And so current events is speaking to us. It's so interesting when the current events really is visually in the parsha. So it's I try to get my news from the Jewish news sources, which are many on the internet, and this week it's all about these women, these very powerful women, and their either rise or fall, and the women behind the women. So if you think about it, this week there are 3 powerful women who are being highlighted. One is the Mrs. Clinton, who failed and who we don't hear from anymore. Whatever she's doing. And the other is her assistant, who's even scarier than her. And the third is the triumphant daughter of the incoming president. So there's these very interesting, and she's Jewish, and she's open about her Judaism, and she talks about her conversion, and she sends her kids to Jewish schools, and there's such a thing called social media. So I don't know if you know what that is, but it means Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and she's very, very on all of them, and she's very open about her, her embracing Judaism and her Jewish way of life and whatever. So it's interesting to see that, because in our parshios now we have Lahavdil. I don't know how much, we have Sari Imenu. So Mr. Trump's daughter her name is Yael Bat Sari Imenu. She's a convert. And she took the name Yael, which is very appropriate for her. And so that's her name. So we have Sari Imenu in the Parsha. We have Hagar in the Parsha. We have... well, that's because what Yael means and what she accomplished in Tanakh. It's interesting that she chose that. I have I don't know, I never spoke to her. I have friends who know her, believe it or not. So it's interesting. Maybe one day I'll get her to come here and in the parsha we also have, in this week's parsha, next week's parsha, we have Yishmael taking a Mitzri wife. There's a lot of parallels going on here if you just open up and think about it. I don't want to really be too specific, but there are 3 major women in these parshas: Avraham Avinu's wife Sarah Imenu, and Hagar, and then there is There's going to be next week's parsha. There's Yiska, but also there's Keturah, but also there's Yishmael's wife, the first wife of Yishmael, which was a Mitzri woman. It's very interesting to see these kinds of things.
Rivka also gets into this.
Rivka gets born in the parsha. That's right. Rivka gets born in the parsha, and all the children of Bethuel, that whole family, is only there to talk about Rivka Imenu. So there's a lot of women going on here in this parsha. A lot of powerful women. A lot of messages to us as Jewish women in the parsha, in the news, and also in the interaction between us all. Now, why am I saying that? Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Moharan that if you want to know what's going on in Shemayim, if you want to know what's going on with the Shechina, with God's presence in this world, if you want to know what's happening, listen to righteous women, Jewish women speaking. Listen to women speaking. The conversations of women oftentimes reflect a higher reality. And it's very, very interesting because you know that we, in our world that we're in our very, beautiful and holy and narrow world that we're in, there were two basic shitots, two basic ways of looking at this election. Either you do talk about it or you completely ignore it. There weren't people who were like sort of in the middle. There were people who were either very, very very opinionated, or don't talk to me about it, I'm not interested, this is not my world, and get back to whatever their own personal life is. And I'm not choosing which is easier, which is better, which is not, but even that concept of having people involved or having people not involved reflects what's going on in Shemayim. It reflects the heavenly spheres. What does that mean? There's a certain level of involvement that the Jewish people have in this world. There is a certain level of involvement that we have, whether it's parnasa, whether it's politically, whether it's just to be involved in politics so that we have a healthy way of living Jewishly. The Agudas Yisrael was created both in America and in Israel and in Europe, or first it started in Europe, to be a political spokesman for the Jewish people, not to be involved in politics at all, just to safeguard our lifestyle in the countries that we're living in. So there's on a certain level that concept of involvement. There's definitely a concept of disconnect. And in Shemayim, there's that concept of, yes, we're part of the world, but yet we're not part of the world. One of the very interesting teachings about why it's so difficult for the non-Jewish world to get along with us is because on a certain level, Rabbi Nachman says this, we're not part of this world. We look like we're part of the world, we act like we're part of the world, we might even think that we're part of the world, but we're not. We're in a different place altogether, and there's a jarring effect when there's that realization that we're part and yet we're not part.
We reject them, actually.
It's okay, on a certain level we do, but when it says in this Torah, Hein am livadad yishkon, when we dwell alone, and the word yishkon is used, it doesn't say Hein am livadad yichyeh, or whatever, yishkon from the word shechina, that we're the shechina presence in this world, which is something it's above human, and we're not, this is going to sound strange a little bit, perhaps, but it's above the normal concept of humanity in this world, which is why the normal concept of humanity in this world, or their concept, has a hard time understanding us, or being with us, or allowing us to even exist. That's the source of anti-Semitism, is that we are a different bria. Yamach Shemam v'zichram, the Germans, Yamach Shemam, they said a truth, and that is, we're different. It's true. Okay, so in the parasha we have, the parasha is called Vayeira. Last week's parasha is called Lech Lecha. This week's parasha is called Vayeira, and these are the two parashiyos dedicated to Avram Avinu. It's so interesting, if you look in Chumash, you see that after this week's parsha, when we start into Chayei Sarah and the whole shidduch of Yitzchak Avinu and Rivka Imenu and that whole, Avram Avinu is still alive for decades after this parsha, but we have no more stories about him. He's already not the first, it's not the starring role. He's the co-star or the co-co-star. But these two parashiyos are about Avram Avinu. So they're his midos of Lech Lecha and Vayeira. Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg says that Lech Lecha
What's Vayeira?
Vayeira is this part. This part.
No, like the Mida Bachachah.
Oh, wait a second. So give me a second. So you already passed.
I thought it was clear to you.
Okay. So I didn't even say that, Chani. You read my mind because I didn't even say that part yet. So Lech Lecha is going, right? Lech Lecha is about going. Hashem says to Avram Avinu, go. Does that mean go until? So Rabbi Yisrael Ginsburg says, does that mean go until you reach the destination and then stop? Clearly not. Because we see that in Lech Lecha, the title of the Parsha, the title has to weave through the entire Parsha. So Lech Lecha, every event in Lech Lecha, every story in Lech Lecha has to be about going. That's the way it is in every Parsha. The title that the Parsha takes, the title of the Parsha Hashavua, has to be the message of every chelak, of every portion in the whole parsha. It's up to us to see how that works, but that's the rule. That's the general rule. So Lech Lecha, doesn't just mean go to Eretz Yisrael and then you've reached the destination, right? Like the app says. What's that app called? Waze. You've reached your destination, right? Or your destination's on the right. Yeah. No, Lech Lecha means your nature is going to always be. You're always going to be traveling. And it doesn't just mean the wandering Jew, which we have been also. It doesn't just mean that. It means a constant movement upward, a constant upward movement. Interesting that halacha, the word halacha, which is Jewish law, is in the word lech lecha, right? It means how do we go? How do we travel? How do we live? That's how we live. We don't live, we never stay put. We're never stagnant. We're always going. And since Avram Avinu is the first of our fathers, so he put into us that midah, that spiritual genetics called going. We're always going higher. Always. That's number one.
Where do you see higher? Going. Yeah.
Okay, because Lech Lecha, for a Jew, you're right. On a certain level, you might say a person can go down. Except in Chassidus, we're taught, or go flat. But even proceeding, going from where you were to where you're going towards. There is a movement. In Chassidus, we're taught that even a yerida, even when you fail, even when a person thinks that they've gone down, they failed, we really went up. We just don't necessarily see that all the time. But the Baal Shem Tov explained to us. Our tzaddikim see a different picture than we see. And the Baal Shem Tov said, every yerida is really, every failing and falling and backtracking and retreat is only litzorach aliyah. It's really only the prerequisite for upward change, positive change. Sometimes we see it, and sometimes we don't. I remember years ago, in this particular group, we talked about jumping, right? How do you jump? You can only jump if you first crouch. If you first go bend, then you can go up. But if you don't bend, you can't elevate. Lech Lecha is all about making nisiot, right? Making travels. Vayeira means to appear. Hashem appears. It's all about seeing Hashem. Lech Lecha means going in the way of Hashem, and Vayeira means seeing Hashem in your own life. It's interesting that Lech Lecha is the third parsha, right? Bereishis Noch Lech Lecha, Vayeira is the fourth. So the third month in the Jewish calendar year, Nisan Sivan. Sivan is the midah of Sivan is walking. And the midah of Iyar, the fourth month, which is paralleling the fourth parsha, is seeing. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So the Sefer HaYetzirah tells us the 12 months of the year, the 12 physical actions of the body. Every month has a different action of the body. So the third month parallels the third parsha. The fourth month parallels the fourth parsha. The third month is going, moving, traveling, heading for a goal. That's, by the way, the third month of of our calendar year. Nisan is Sivan. Sivan is the month that we receive the Torah, and then Iyar, which is the month of Reuven. It's about seeing correctly, seeing Hashem in your life, seeing Hashgacha, and that's the parsha. Okay, so Vayeira. Vayeira is again chock full of stories. It's all about stories, and every one of those stories is another revelation of Hashem. Because the parsha is called Vayeira. Therefore, every story in the Parsha has to be a revelation of Hashem. And we see that there's happy stories in the Parsha. Both days of Rosh Hashanah, the Kriyas HaTorah for both days of Rosh Hashanah is in our Parsha. So on a certain level, we're revisiting Rosh Hashanah. Does Rosh Hashanah feel like forever ago? It does, right? It was only, right? It feels like a long time. It's like in a different world. We're in a different world from Rosh Hashanah, right? Rosh Hashanah we're only a month away from Rosh Hashanah. It's not so far away ago. It's only 6 weeks ago, Rosh Hashanah. And yeah, but it feels like a different planet, yeah? So, but the Parshas, so we have to think about Rosh Hashanah, which means new beginnings. In Eretz Yisrael today, I don't know if you noticed it, but it was raining a little bit this morning, and okay, now it looks like it cleared up a little bit, but there was rain already, Baruch Hashem. And the Mabul starts on Shabbos, Yud Zayin. Today's the 15th day of the month of Mar Cheshvan, and the moon is gigantic and clear. In Chutz La'aretz, there was such a thing called a supermoon. Did you know this? Yeah. In Chutz La'aretz, yeah. So here, it didn't, I don't know, I'll tell you my experience with this moon. So they were saying that the moon is the closest that it was to the Earth since 1948. Now, 1948 is a very important year for us. All the news media is talking about that the moon is the closest and the biggest, it will appear the biggest since the year 1948. Why is 1948 important to us? For two reasons. Number one, Eretz Yisrael. But number two, Avram Avinu was born in the real year 1948. 1948, since creation, was when Avram Avinu was born. So it's an important year, and this is the Parshas of Avram Avinu, and they're talking about 1948. So the moon in Chutz La'aretz, people were sending pictures. You can't tell if the moon is big or small, because how can you tell? And a person can make it bigger, and there's such a thing called Photoshop now. You can change every picture. You want to get rid of your wrinkles now? It's very easy. You don't have to do anything about going to a beauty salon. Just go to a Photoshop. Meaning, take a picture of yourself and then learn how to play with that computer program, and it will make you beautiful and young again. It's very easy. But here in Israel, so the moon, I looked at the moon. It's a big question of how you do that, but whatever. 2 nights ago, when it was supposed to be the big supermoon, when it was supposed to be big, in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, it was bright. It wasn't necessarily bigger. I've seen the moon bigger, but it was so bright that it was really, I don't know if I ever saw the moon so bright. It was like luminous. Right. And I said, Hashem, that's it, because it says that the illumination, when Mashiach comes, the sun and the moon are going to, the moon's going to start catching up to where it used to be, and the moon will be as luminous as the sun. So it wasn't necessarily, I don't know how to, I'm not an astronomer, so I don't know how to measure that. It wasn't giving off like fire, but it was so bright that really, even though you're not supposed to look directly at the moon for other reasons, but I didn't want to look at it because it was, I saw it was like silvery bright. It was amazing. And last night, when it was the full moon, that was 2 nights ago, when the whole world was looking at the moon over there. And in different parts of the world, the moon was very, very big and yellow. But here it wasn't. It was normal size, but it was so bright. And last night, when I looked at the moon, it was cloudy. You couldn't see anything. All you could see, it was very interesting, because they were saying to look at the moon, look at the sky when it's moonrise. Moonrise last night was about 6 o'clock, 6:30, right? It was about when, and I know from my apartment where the moon, the traveling, because I see it. You look at the window, the moon's there, then you look at it's over there. So I know the maslul of the moon, the arc of the moon. And when I looked where it was, I didn't see it because it was cloudy, but the clouds were bright yellow. That was interesting to me. That means in back of the moon was being covered. The clouds wouldn't let us see the moon. It was like Hashem was steering the moon. He was hiding it, but the moon, the clouds that were in front of it were shining, were yellow. They weren't like gray or pink or whatever, white. They were, you could see that there was something in back of that was illuminating these clouds. And my thought was, for the rest of the world, the moon represents the Jewish people. We know that. It represents the female, it represents the Jewish people, it represents Hashem's choosing how to make the world. Originally, moon and sun were equal. The Gemara, we learned this years and years ago, and then the moon came to Hashem and said, how are 2 kings going to rule with the same crown? And Hashem said, you're right. Go diminish yourself. And the moon said, wait a minute, if you said I'm right, why am I going to be diminished, right? And there's a whole Gemara about what Hashem said and how Hashem tried to fix that. In the end, Hashem said, you're right, and I can't fix it until the end of time. So please forgive me. I'm apologizing, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the moon, but this has to be like this, and it'll be fixed at the end of time. Chazal say that that's the Jewish people. We're compared to the moon, and until the end of time, we were in a diminished state, in an exile state, and Hashem chose to do that for whatever. This is Hashem's world, and it's Hashem's plans, and we're just blessed players on Hashem's team. But when I saw the moon being so luminous in Israel, to me that was Hashem saying, your kedusha, your shining is strong now. But the fact is, in the rest of the world, it was big. That means the world has to see us large and powerful. That's how the world will be impressed with us. The world has to see us large, but we have to see ourselves, this is my interpretation, as holy and shiny and sparkly and illuminating. Not just big and powerful, that every invention and technology comes from us. Not just that, that's what the world recognizes. And every medical thing comes from us. And every moral part of the world is because of us. Not just, that's the world needs big power. But we need to know our kedusha, we need to know our holiness, our neshama. We need to know that we're a neshama. We're not just a powerful nation. We're really the neshama of the world. We're the Shechina presence of Hashem in this world. That's the shine that I saw. That was just my...
Isn't the sun shining behind the moon?
Correct. Correct. Yes, that's right. That's right. And you know what? I want to say something. I don't know. I don't know how that works. I don't know how that works in terms of the sun shining on the moon. Because remember that ultimately, every one of these is just a player in the game, like like the pieces of the little Monopoly pieces that you put on the thing. They're all just simanim, they're all just allegories of thoughts. The moon has a job, the sun has a job. But it's an allegory to these thoughts. And you're right. On a certain level, perhaps, there's still a sun that's shining on the moon. I don't know last night how that worked. I don't know what was going on astronomically, but hashkafically, that was my thought on it. Listen, the tzaddikim are saying that we're in a blessed time now. They're saying that Hashem turned the clock. It's like, remember the old-fashioned washing machines? I always like to give this example. Remember the old-fashioned washing machines? There was a dial, and every time the machine progressed to the next stage in the wash, it would click and move, right? Nowadays, everything's electronic and nothing clicks and moves. But in those days, you had to click and move. And I always feel that whenever a major event in the world history happens, it's Hashem clicked and moved. Something progressed. It was a major progress in the Geula process. We're in that process now. It hasn't finished yet. We're in the middle of it. Because we're in the middle of it, we don't see, we don't know what, where, how, but we're in that process, and we're in 1 week. It's just 1 week and 1 day, or really just 1 week, since the whole world was waking up from shock, shifting. Things have shifted. So many Rabbanim have said that it's a blessed time now. It's a time of miracles.
October,
there's even
November,
more
December.
than 3 supermoons. There's been like,
the ones
but right. Listen, supermoon, super Jew. That's right. That's right.
Why are we not supposed to be looking at it?
Oh, because the moon is still the Gemara says that the moon, because the moon represents the Jews in exile, because it's still not complete, so it's painful to look at the moon and say. They say the story about the Chavetz Chaim, which we can really relate to it right now. The Chavetz Chaim, when he's thought about they said that whenever he would think about or talk about the Balfour Declaration, he would cry. Now, the Chavetz Chaim was a Kohen, and he very much wanted to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. And Rav Kook was a Kohen, also wanted to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. And they were all learning, both were learning about Kodshim and the Avodah. Now we have a big yeshiva in the old city that has been for years already, for 25, 30, maybe even since 1967. They've been training Kohanim and learning the Avodah, the Beis HaMikdash, so that they said that it'll take them just a week. They have everything down pat, and they have, whatever. Bezrat Hashem. We don't know what that's going to be like. But the story is that the Chavetz Chaim, when he spoke about the Balfour Declaration, he cried, saying, he felt bad that the Geula is coming in such a lowly manner through the klipot of the nations of the world. Because it could have come, straight from Shemayim, Moshe Rabbeinu with miracles, the staff, the mata and the makos, and it could have been revealed. And he said, it's happening in a concealed way, in Derech HaTeva. Rav Kook said the same thing. It's happening Derech HaTeva. Rav Kook didn't cry about it, but the Chavetz Chaim cried about it, saying, we could have been so much greater. It could have been so much more miraculous. Instead, it's happening Derech HaTeva. So we could say the same thing about what's going on now. So many things we could say is happening Derech HaTeva, but at least it's happening, which I'm happy about. So he said that, the tzaddikim said that, and the Chavetz Chaim would cry. He wasn't, the story is that he would cry tears, but he wasn't crying tears of sadness, because how can you cry tears of sadness at the beginning of the Geula? But his tears perhaps were about the fact that Be'ita Achishena, the Haftorah, that Be'ita Achishena means if we were worthy, the Gemara says if we're worthy, it's going to happen miraculously and quickly in an amazing way. And if we're not, it's going to schlep out till the very, very end, and it's going to happen derech HaTeva. And that's what that's what it seems to be now. Because if you think about it, here we are in Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim HaKodesh. It's a magnificent country that we have here. Everything is developing, and on every single level. Okay, there's also the other side of the story, but the positive side is that we have food, we have drinks. Remember 35 years ago, the year after Shemitah, that was the first time I came here. There was nothing to eat, kimat, nothing to drink, and all the food that we contained fit into a small makola. There were no big supermarkets because we didn't have that much food to sell. So everything fit into a makola, and now we have huge, right? So that's part of the Geula. It's part of redemption. But we're so used to it that we don't feel the excitement of that. People, when they come here, some people when they come here, they do feel the excitement of it. One of my nephews, when he came to learn for his year, I picked him up at the airport and I took him in the Nesher, to the yeshiva, and I see he's like staring out the window, and then he says to me, "Where are all the Jews?" So I said, "What do you mean?" He really thought that there would be biblical Jews, like not streimels, with biblical-looking Jews, and he only sees Jews and regularly they look like American Jews, yarmulkes and hats and whatever, cell phones, and we're the Jews. So there are certain people when they come here, they're ready for the Geula, right? We got used to it. Like, when are you going to Osherad? I'll go with you. Can you pick me up some salmon? We didn't have salmon here 20 years ago. There was no such thing. Like, we're so used to the Geula process. It's happening slowly. It's Perek Chaf Aleph Pasuk Gimel. So the Pasuk before says, right, the Kriya from Rosh Hashanah. I'll read the 3 Psukim because they're all exciting. And it's such a downplay. It's all of a sudden, like, first is the story of they go to Avimelech again. Avimelech kidnaps Sarah, and that whole story. That's lots and lots of Psukim. Then, right after that, Una Parad, without a fanfare. Thank you. Vashem pakad Sarah, and Hashem remembered Sarah, kasher amar, like he said. Vayas Hashem l'Sarah kasher diber, and Hashem did for Sarah what he promised, what he said. Vatzahar batzelin Sarah la'Abraham ben. Vatzahar, she became pregnant. Let's just sit by that word for a few seconds. Vatzahar, she became pregnant. She was 9 months in that ecstasy state. Remember how it was, if any of you were lucky enough to be pregnant, that state of Vatzahar. So we read it quickly, Vatzahar Vateled. No, let's enjoy the Vatzahar. And she was pregnant, and she was feeling the baby, and maybe she was even nauseous, probably not, but maybe she was, whatever, she couldn't move, and she was getting bigger, and she was, couldn't sleep until finally, Vateled. She gave birth. What was that like? Could you imagine? Could you imagine the trepidation, the terror, and the excitement at the same time? Now, every woman goes through that with her first birth, but everything was depending on her. She couldn't have a baby. Chazal tell us that she did not have a reproductive system. She didn't have a womb. What does that mean, that she got pregnant? It means it was supernatural. Still, she could have worried, just like Lahavdil, infant Abdullah's Hagar miscarried the first one, because it was such a bad story. she could have worried that maybe she was not worthy. Could you imagine what those 9 months must have been like for her? Ecstasy and agony. That's a book, right? The agony and the ecstasy, right? The ecstasy of, wow, this is happening. But the terror of, I might mess this up. I can't imagine the sensory, what she was going through. Vateled Sarah la'Avraham ben. She gives birth, and it's a boy. So every one of these words we have to savor like a good chocolate. You know, you don't chew it, you suck on it, and you enjoy it. She gave birth, and it was a boy. She gave birth, she didn't die, like Rochel dies by birth, second birth. And it's a boy, and it's to Avraham. Lizakunav, in his old age. Now, he wasn't that much older. 13 years in an old person doesn't make such a big difference. He was just 13 years before Hagar gave birth, and he has more children after this, many more children, 6 more boys after this. Lamoed asher diber oto Elokim. On exactly the day to the year. A year ago the angels came. Exactly on that day, she gives birth. Now here's the pasuk I want to talk about. Vayikra Avraham et Shem beno hanolad lo asher yalda lo Sarah Yitzchak. And Avraham called the name of his son that was born to him, that Sarah gave birth to him, Yitzchak. In that pasuk you have all their 3 names. I don't know if there's another pasuk that has the father, the mother, and the child in the Jewish people. I don't know if we have such a pasuk. When I read this pasuk last night, and how many thousands of times have we read this pasuk, right? It hit me that that's the family. That's the family. They became a family, the father and the mother and the boy. All their names are mentioned in that one pasuk. It's such a blessed unit, and that's where we come from. We come from this little pasuk of Avraham and Sarah. Now, Avraham had a Hagar, and he had a Keturah, and he had a Yishmael, and he had a whole bunch of others.
I thought Keturah and Hagar were
Some say that they were the same. Mm-hmm. Some say that they were the same, but there's an opinion that says the following. There's an opinion that says that he had to marry 3 separate women to have a child from each of the sons of Noach. So Shem, Ham, and Yefet, right? So Sarah was from Shem because she was his niece. Hagar was from Ham, she was a Mitzri. And Yefet, so Keturah, was from Yefet. There's an opinion that says that there were 3 separate women, and that way, v'yitbrachu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'amim, right? It says that all the nations of the world will be blessed through Avraham. That means that he had to make a marital alliance with every one of the 1/3 of the world, right? The 3 sons of.
But if she was the bigger miracle, why does it mention Liz Kunav if he even had children after?
Okay, so what does it mean Liza Kunav here at all? Right. What does it mean Liza Kunav? He wasn't old at all. Remember, it says that he looked the same as Yitzchak Avinu. They looked the same. They were young. He prayed that at the end of his life he should look old, that people should know who's who. It's hard to know what means Liza Kunav here. Perhaps it means in terms of the. I don't know what it means. I don't want to make my own interpretation here. But you needed to have a lot of emunah to get through all that stuff. The parsha begins with the bris milah, the 3 malachim who come. Who are the 3 malachim who come? Michael comes, Gavriel comes, and Raphael comes. Those 3 malachim come, and they give the besor, and they do the whole thing with stone, and they turn stone upside down, and then they run to Avimelech. And they have that whole episode there. And then we have the story of Sarah Imenu giving birth. Huh?
No.
But then afterwards they went to Gerar, right? Before she gives birth, they go to Avimelech, and they end up standing there. And then they have the story of the birth, and then the bris milah, and then the sending away of Yishmael, and her finally leaving. And then comes the Akedas Yitzchak. The very end of the parsha is the Akedas Yitzchak. So how could the Akedas Yitzchak be? I'm just going to say this very quickly because we're finished. How could the Akedas Yitzchak be a Vayeira? Vayeira means Hashem appears. And we know that by the Akedas Yitzchak, Avram Avinu has 0 da'as. meaning he didn't know what to do. He had all of his, everything, by anytime any person has a test. Right now we're all good, we're frum, we're strong, we have emunah, right? Because we're all sitting in the classroom learning Torah, the best thing we could do practically. Not practically, except for doing it in the Beis HaMikdash. But when you have a test, you lose all of your madregas, you lose all of your levels. Everything falls apart when you're having a test. That's a real test. And I happen to Avraham Avinu also, that whatever his emunah, his understanding, his understanding of how the world is supposed to be, his understanding of Hashem, he didn't get it. There was so much confusion, so much contradictions. And he passed that. Whatever that means, however that means, he passed that. From here, Chazal tell us that even that test, when he didn't see anything, was a revelation. It was a concealed revelation. It was a hastara. It was it was Hashem being hidden in a person's life. But it wasn't put in the next week's parsha. It was put in this week's parsha to show us that the hardest point in Avraham Avinu's life, because from now on it's all uphill. That's the last test. This is the last test, really. From now on it's all normal and uphill. Okay, it's true that Sarah Mena dies. I don't know if that's considered one of his tests, because that's part of life. But at this point, it was the hardest thing he ever did, and that's how the parsha almost caps off until we see the birth of Rivki Imenu. But we see that even in the Akeidos of Yitzchak, there was a revelation of Hashem. Even in the hardest, harshest tests, where we don't understand, we're upset, it's hard for us. Sometimes we think we fail. Even there is Hashem is appearing to us. Hashem is there. And we forget to ask for Him. We forget to look for Him because we're in the middle of a test. We don't have the kochos. We don't have the ability to look for Hashem while we're going through a test. But we have to know, the parsha is all about Hashem is there. And when the test is over, we look back, we say, oh yeah, that was all a test. And it was Hashem there the whole time. So it's an amazing week that we're in. It's an amazing time of life that we're in. We have to relish, in my opinion, every second of just seeing what Hashem is doing in the world, and I guess opening up our hearts to the possibility that we really might be seeing the end of the end, and the beginning of the beginning.